Greetings. This is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we'll be taking a look at the December 1925 issue of Weird Tales. The cover is a typical pulp era cover, the kind that Weird Tales was well known for. I kind of always liked these covers, as cheesy as they are. This one is for the Tenants of Broussac by Seabury Quinn, which is going to be the first story we get into right after looking at the table of contents, in which we see 13 stories, 2 poems, and part 2 of a serial. As mentioned before, we'll get into the cover story. This is the second Jules de Grandin tale by Seabury Quinn. In this one, de Grandin investigates some strange happenings in the castle of Broussac, wherein the family, who are part of the nobility that has no money as society was changing, rent out the ancestral home to tenants in order to get some money coming in. Unfortunately, the last few tenants have all left suddenly after one of them either died in mysterious circumstances or experienced something strange. And so they ask de Grandin to investigate, which he willingly does. And he brings along his friend, Dr. Trowbridge, who is also the narrator of the first tale. They will come to the castle. Of course, eventually de Grandin figures it all out before anyone else does and manages to defeat the evil in the castle of Broussac. I quite enjoyed this story. De Grandin is an unusual character. The combination of the supernatural and otherworldly, along with an investigator who uses the scientific method and logic to figure out what's happening and how to overcome it, is quite enjoyable. And it is followed by When the Graves Were Opened by Arthur J. Burks. A man invents a machine that allows you to project yourself into the past to witness what happened there. He shows this machine to a friend of his who is an atheist and who decides that he wants to go see the crucifixion. I don't know if this is the first story of people going into the past for that event, but I know there's been quite a few since. At the end, what we find out is that what we're reading is actually the notes of the person who plugged into the machine is jotting this down on some paper, and the person who invented the machine cleaned it all up for us. It was an interesting story. I think the take on atheism is totally wrong, but clearly it was aimed at an audience that, for the most part, were believers. And it's followed by The Sea Thing by Frank Belknap Long Jr., who I'm happy to see back in the pages of Weird Tales. It's been quite a few issues since a story of his was there. This tale is told from the point of view of the captain's log of a boat that has been drifting at sea with no wind to fill her sails. The remains of the crew are those who survived a cholera epidemic on board. They've been drifting for a long time, so they're short on supplies. They do, however, bring on board somebody they found drifting on a small boat who has some supplies, so they're very thankful for his presence. However, people are starting to die again. The captain manages to figure out some of what's happening, and along with one of the sailors, will set a trap. While he survives the encounter, the sailor won't. The story ends when finally they feel a breeze and they hope that they will soon be able to reach port. A tale that focuses much more on the action than the horror, though that's not to say that what happens to the sailors isn't horrifying. The characters in long stories tend to be much more proactive than the ones in Lovecraft stories, for example, who experience the horror and are overwhelmed by it. Here they sometimes are overwhelmed, but they still try to fight back somehow. In this case, they succeed, but they don't always do. It is followed by The Fan by Frank Owen. This concerns an old woman who was reputed for her beauty when she was younger. The men who would court her and get together with her would inevitably be found dead with their lips missing, we find out what happened to them eventually. It is quite a horrifying tale, which leaves less to the imagination than some people would like, and at the same time leaves enough room for your imagination to make the worst of it. Following it is The Black Box by H. Thompson Rich. This is about a young man who courted a girl. One of his rivals will confront him one night, threatening violence. The man will fight back, seriously wound the rival, gouging out an eye, and tell the man that he will let him go, but if he ever sees him again, he will kill him. He manages to keep this encounter a secret, will eventually marry the girl. His memory of what he did still haunts him. At the wedding, they will receive a mysterious black box as a gift from someone unknown, and it doesn't seem to be able to be opened until somebody at the wedding reception does, sees the horrifying thing inside. The whole thing is narrated by the man to a friend of his as he's in the asylum, and his actions upon seeing what's inside really show that he's gone over the edge, if you ask me. It started as a fairly standard story, but the very last few paragraphs make the story more memorable, but not necessarily in a good way. At the end of it, we have a short poem by William James Price called The Ghost Girl. I've done a reading of this one, and I'll link to it in the description. And it's followed by The Valley of Spiders by H.G. Wells. A very good story, not what most of us would expect from Wells. I've done a reading of this. I will link it in the description. It is worth checking out, though not if you suffer from arachnophobia. It's probably not the first story to feature spiders, and it certainly won't be the last, but its quality still stands out. Following this, we have Sir Rupert's Treasure by James Cox, in which a man goes to his ancestral home in Scotland, has what may be an encounter with a ghost. Like many ghost stories, I found this one relatively disappointing, and the ending fell really flat. This one's quite forgettable. Next is The Deadly Amanita by Eli Colter. A writer looking for a story goes to meet with a hermit, hoping that maybe the hermit's story is interesting. The hermit in question is himself a writer, a poet. He's only published one book. For the last 10 years, he's been in a self-imposed exile because one of his hobbies was mushroom picking, and he picked a deadly mushroom, caused the death of his wife. Overall, I found this a rather long, kind of disappointing story, and it is followed by the sixth weird story reprint, Fitz-James O'Brien's What Was It? About a group of people who moved with their landlady to a new house, which is reputedly haunted. While nothing happens at first, eventually some strange things do happen, and one of the men has an encounter with something that is invisible. He and a friend will manage to capture it. However, even though they try to feed it, it ends up starving, at which point they make a cast of it and bury the body in the backyard. The story's nicely atmospheric, but I do find the characters are missing the obvious here. They're all going on about how they can't see it, nothing they can do can really show the form of the creature. They can get an idea what it's like by putting a sheet over it. This story was maybe the weakest of the reprints so far. It is followed by The Consul's Bones by W.J. Stamper. This is the story of a sailor who is on a Navy ship. They are sent to Martinique after a volcanic eruption, allegedly to help, but all they end up doing is going on shore to retrieve the body of the consul with someone who knows the town a little bit, even though most of it is destroyed. They reach where the consulate is. There's destruction all around them. And at some point, they sort of arbitrarily take some bones, and the commanding officer who tells the story here will just say, well, these are the bones of the consul, right? And the men all say, yes, of course they are. Then they make their way back. This story really didn't grab me in any way. It's followed by a very short piece called Retribution by George T. Spillman, which is just half a page long. Very short pieces can be very good, but when they fail at what they're trying to do, they feel more like writing exercises. We then have a much longer tale called The Last Man by Douglas Oliver, which I'm not going to recap. It's kind of disconnected, and the ending just comes out of nowhere and doesn't seem to conclude anything. We'll leave that one at that. It is followed by The Hour of Death by Grover Brinkman. In this one, a friend of the narrator contacts him because he's been getting letters for the last several weeks telling him that he will die at 1 o'clock in the morning on a given day, and now there's only 2 days left. The narrator decides to help out his friend. As they're nearing the house of the friend, they will have an accident with someone who's running in the street, who turns out to be the butler of the friend, who, as he is dying, admits he's the one who sent the letters as retribution for something that was done to his sister. And when they make their way to the house, thinking this is now resolved, everything's fine, they find the friend has passed away and died of fright. Nothing really supernatural unless you count dying of fright as a supernatural event, which I guess some people do. Neither was it all that engrossing. And at the end of it, we have a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, The Haunted Palace. Like many of Poe's verse works, is quite moody and always worth a look at. And then we have part two of the serial, The Waning of a World. In part one, the main characters had built and then launched a spaceship, a sphere, to go to Mars. In this one, they approach Mars and land on it, find out it is inhabited by what appears to be men. They are made welcome in the Emperor's palace. The Emperor apparently rules the entire planet. The youngest of the companions, who's had several dreams about a beautiful woman, has some encounters. While he's not sure, he believes it is the woman he has seen in his dreams, which eventually is confirmed. And she tells him that her father and her are political prisoners in the Emperor's palace. And the Emperor plans to force her to marry him in just a few days. And she asks for the Earthlings' help. So your typical science fantasy type story, a lot of action and mystery and all of that. What I find makes this one stand out, I've mentioned it when going over part one, and is how a lot of details were quite clever. So in this one, of course, Mars will have canals. One of the things they suppose is that since an open canal would cause most of the water to evaporate before it got from the poles to the equator, the canals are probably underground, and what we're seeing from Earth are the plants that grow above them since the soil is wetter and thus more fertile. The lower gravity is talked about, which also brings along a lower air pressure. They got the real air pressure wrong, but it is very reasonable to assume that there's a lower air pressure if there's less gravity. And this was introduced through the device of the altimeter reading the wrong height since it's based on the air pressure of Earth. The humans also need quite a bit of time to learn the Martian language, both spoken and written. It makes this serial a bit of a joy to read since it pleasantly surprises you in small, clever ways like that, in addition to having lots of fun mystery and action going on. And finally, we have the Eyrie. Again, just some letters from readers praising this or that story, and a bit of talk of stories that are coming up. And I think the magazine must really be doing better. The fact that they know at least part of the content a few issues ahead bodes well for the magazine. A magazine that's not doing well tends to have staff focus on the current issue and little else. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at the December 1925 issue of Weird Tales.